In the history of modern warfare, there are weapons that weren't designed to flatten cities or strike targets from dozens of kilometers away, yet they decided the outcome of many hours of close fighting. Flamethrowers and flame tanks in World War II belong to that group. They appeared when artillery, bombs, and grenades could not drag the enemy out of blind corners in bunkers, pillboxes, multi-story buildings, and cave systems. The basic idea is simple. Spray a stream of burning fuel directly into the enemy's hiding place, raise the temperature, and deny oxygen, forcing them to leave their position or be silenced altogether. But turning that idea into an effective and relatively safe reality took armies nearly 3 decades, from the first trials in 1915 to standardization in 1942 to 1945, along with a series of design, fuel, ignition, and tactical refinements. In World War I, Germany brought the Flammenwerfer to the battlefield. It had a large psychological effect, but the device was bulky, over 30 kilograms, and prone to malfunctions. Those lessons accompanied officers into the mid-1930s and became the basis for a new generation when World War II broke out. In 1939 in Poland and 1940 in France, Germany used the Flammenwerfer 35, FMW-35. The basic configuration was 2 fuel tanks and a propellant gas cylinder connected by a hose to a lance with an ignition unit. The filled weight was about 35 to 36 kilograms. Practical range was 20 to 25 meters with thin fuel. Using thickened fuel made it stick better, but shortened the range. By 1941, the FMW-41 appeared, lighter, more compact, and with a more reliable igniter. German assault teams used the flamethrower as the final drill bit. Machine guns and mortars suppressed the enemy. Engineers used Bangalore torpedoes to clear obstacles. The flamethrower gunner closed to the loophole, sprayed for 1 to 2 seconds, then fell back 3 to 5 meters while teammates tossed demolition charges or rushed in. The British and Americans were slower at first. Before 1942, they prioritized artillery, mortars, and placed demolition charges. But the realities in Europe and the Pacific forced a change. In 1943, Britain introduced the Flamethrower Portable No. 2 Mark II, nicknamed the Life Boy, because the fuel tank resembled a life ring. It weighed about 29 to 30 kilograms, had a range of 25 to 30 meters, and a total cumulative firing time of roughly 10 to 15 seconds, divided into short bursts of 0.5 to 2 seconds. The U.S. replaced the M1 with the M2-2 and then the M2A1. Filled weight about 27 to 30 kilograms, with a range of 20 to 35 meters depending on the fuel formula, smoother handling, and more reliable ignition. The Soviet Union fielded the ROKS 2/3, a compact backpack tank with a nozzle disguised to look like a Mosin rifle barrel to reduce the chance of being singled out by snipers. The common traits of handheld models were short range and limited firing time, so training emphasized very short bursts, approaching at an oblique 30 to 45-degree angle, and always operating in 3-man teams: the flamethrower gunner, a covering gunner, and a fuel ammunition bearer. At the same time, many armies mounted flamethrowers on armored chassis to improve crew protection, increase range, and fuel reserves. The Soviets early converted T-34s into OT-34s from 1942, installing a nozzle in the nose or coaxial with the main gun, reaching 60 to 80 meters with thickened fuel. Germany and Italy experimented on Panzer III/4 and L3/35 chassis, but not at large scale. In Britain, a specialist program produced the Churchill Crocodile. It kept the 75mm gun, added a coaxial flamethrower nozzle, and towed a trailer carrying some 1,800 liters of fuel with an effective range of 80 to 100 meters. The U.S. and the Pacific fitted Shermans with flamethrower kits such as the POACW-SH5, nicknamed Zippo. Flame tanks let crews operate under armor, approach reinforced concrete positions or caves more aggressively, and deliver multiple burns during an attack, at the cost of being larger targets and the risk that hoses or trailers could be struck. Early urban and fortification battles in 1942 to 1943 demonstrated the role of flamethrowers. At Sevastopol in 1942, German forces attacked Soviet concrete fortifications. The familiar sequence, clear wire, suppress with MG-34/42 and mortars, assault teams crawl into floored firing positions. The flamethrower gunner delivers a short burst. Teammates throw demolition charges, then surge in. At Stalingrad, August 1942 to February 1943, close fighting in tenement houses, factories, stairwells, and storage rooms reduced the effectiveness of indirect fire against rear defenses. Soviet assault teams used ROKS in combination with PPSH-41s, light charges for small rooms and heavier charges for thick-walled depots, maintaining the rule smoke first, flame after, and never staying at a loophole for more than 2 seconds. Both sides knew flamethrowers do not act alone. In the Pacific, the effect was even clearer. The Japanese built layered cave and tunnel networks, using volcanic rock and coral to withstand shells and bombs. At Guadalcanal, 1942 to 1943, Americans quickly learned that grenades and demolition charges often failed to clear deep, confined positions. When the M2 was fielded, a 1 to 2 second burst into a cave entrance sharply raised temperature and lowered oxygen. Those inside either retreated deeper or fell silent. Training manuals were updated. Flamethrower teams of 3 approached after a smoke screen from grenades or 60/81 millimeter mortars, with Browning M1919 or 50 caliber support. Fire, then immediately withdraw a few meters. By 1944 to 1945, this lesson was applied at Palaiu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, where rock ledges and cave systems turned any assault without flamethrowers into a prolonged, costly affair. Normandy, 6th of June, 1944, was a major milestone for flame tanks in Europe. Crocodiles were deployed against coastal strongpoints and bocage defenses. When the vehicle halted 70 to 80 meters from a pillbox and fired 2 short bursts, surrender rates visibly rose. Not because the 75 millimeter gun was ineffective, but because a directed jet made those inside the bunker unable to hold out, compressing the time to soften a target from hours of shelling to minutes. In Italy, thick stone walls and steep slopes made indirect artillery poor at pushing defenders out of rear rooms. The crocodile's flame through windows or ground floors created safer approaches for infantry. Crocodile crews followed strict safety: keep distance, avoid exposing the fuel trailer to direct fire, have supporting vehicles and infantry on both flanks to catch fleeing defenders or counter anti-tank gunners. At Palaiu in September 1944, the honeycombed terrain caused shell bursts to misfire and only collapse entrances. Sherman Zippos had to operate with each infantry company. The short burst stop-observe technique emerged. Spray for 0.5 to 1 second. Pause 2 to 3 seconds to watch for dense black smoke spouting from cracks, then fire again if there was still enemy activity. At Iwo Jima, February-March 1945, many bunker complexes were only neutralized by combining flame with demolition charges. A notable example is Herschel Woody Williams. Over 2 brutal days, he repeatedly crawled 20 to 30 meters across exposed ground under machine gun fire, used an M2 to give short bursts into loopholes so comrades could close in. He changed igniters when soot clogged them and struck from different angles. His actions opened critical firing points and earned him the Medal of Honor. At Okinawa, April to June 1945, facing multi-layered tunnel systems at Shuri, after-action reports rated flame tanks the primary tool for clearing caves when terrain allowed tank access. Each cave complex could consume 1,000 to 1,500 liters of fuel divided among several vehicles over 30 to 40 minutes. Infantry ringed the area to prevent the enemy from closing with mines or anti-tank weapons. Also at Iwo Jima, another major act of valor was tied directly to this weapon. Corporal Charles W. Lindbergh, flamethrower operator of Company E, 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines, 5th Marine Division. In the early days of the landing, Lindbergh's team was tasked with clearing pillboxes and engine rooms at the base of Mount Suribachi. He fired short bursts, constantly changed angles, and coordinated demolition charges to open lines of fire. On 23 February 1945, Lindbergh was among the group that raised an early American flag on Suribachi's summit, a smaller flag, a less photographed moment, than the more famous second flag raising. Before that symbolic moment, Lindbergh's flamethrower work had secured the safety of the assault point at the mountain's base and opened the advance corridor. On the ground, the procedure was dry and repetitive. Crawl close, spray 0.5 to 1 second, back off, set charges, repeat. But those disciplined bursts compressed hours of fighting into minutes and turned slopes bristling with firing points into climbable steps. Compared with other contemporary weapons, flamethrowers occupied a distinct niche rather than a direct replacement. Bangalore torpedoes were for clearing wire and pathways, not for dealing with people in rear rooms. Flamethrowers dealt with the human factor, while Bangalores solved physical obstacles. Satchel charges of 4 to 10 kilograms demolished structures more effectively, but flamethrowers could clean a room without causing total collapse, useful when a unit needed to occupy rather than destroy. Artillery and mortars delivered powerful indirect fire against exposed targets, but were less effective in labyrinthine interiors unless firing direct shots into loopholes. Flamethrowers concentrated energy into the exact pocket that needed treatment. Man-portable anti-tank weapons like the PIAT, bazooka, and Panzerfaust dealt with armor and thin bunk walls by shape-charge warheads, but they did not create heat and oxygen deprivation pressure. White phosphorus and smoke created fire and obscuration, but WP was hard to control directionally. A flamethrower produced a directed jet, controllable in timing and dosage. Defenders seldom stayed put under flame attack. At Stalingrad, defenders drilled ventilation holes in roofs or rear walls to avoid suffocation. Earth-packed chamber doors and sandbag hot doors were used to resist jets. Hearing the hiss of a flamethrower, defenders might withdraw through pre-drilled openings into adjacent rooms, hold their breath, and wait for the fire to die before throwing grenades back. In Normandy and Italy, the Panzerfaust posed a real threat to crocodiles, so crews kept distance, fired short bursts, changed angles, and kept infantry to their flanks. In Okinawa, Japanese teams used stake mines, very low firing ports, and interconnected rat holes that forced M2 gunners not to fire straight down a tunnel axis. These countermeasures made the rule smoke first, suppress, short burst, back off, demolition, not a trick, but a matter of survival. Operationally, the most persistent nuisance was the igniter head and soot buildup. After a few bursts, soot would coat the nozzle and weaken the jet. The gunner had to swap the ignition assembly quickly, check seals, and dry fire the trigger before advancing again. Thickened fuel stuck and burned longer, but reduced range. A strong headwind could blow the jet back, forcing a change in approach angle to avoid the flame being blown back. The ideal entry angle was 30 to 45 degrees to the wall so the flame would sweep the compartment instead of piercing straight in and ricocheting out. At night, flamethrowers exposed positions from far away. By day, sunlight and white smoke made it harder for defenders to aim, but flamethrower crews still had to read smoke against the background to gauge wind. A Soviet snapshot balances the picture. A three-man ROKS team in a factory stairwell at Stalingrad moved to a rhythm. The lead threw a smoke grenade, the middle brought the nozzle to a wall corner, and the rear provided covering fire with a PPSH-41. When the whoomp echoed inside, an indicator of pressure and oxygen change, the gunner immediately stepped back 2 paces so the demolition charge could be set. They learned to count 1, 2 as the burst, and not to overstay. At Sevastopol, many German Flammenwerfer teams were accompanied by men carrying small steel shields to block return fire. The shields were cumbersome and heavy, but allowed the gunner an extra half-second to place the jet in the opening. Logistics and training governed the tempo of operations. A company required a considerable supply of fuel just to soften a few bunker complexes. Supply lines had to follow close behind infantry because trailers or reserve tanks were attractive targets. Flamethrower gunner training was not long but strict on safety. Quick valve open-close, handling hose leaks, hand signals amid noise, and swapping tanks under pressure. Units rotated the gunner role every few hours to avoid exhaustion from carrying 27 to 36 kilogram packs. A simple but effective convention emerged. When a thick black plume spurted out, that was enough. Stop to let the demolition charge finish the job and avoid wasting fuel. Terrain and weather directly affect weapon choice. In European cities, brick buildings, basements, and narrow stairwells let a flame jet fill a volume easily. Bricks heat up fast and retain heat, boosting effectiveness. On volcanic Pacific islands, deep caves with many branches hold pockets of air and moisture, so you need short probing bursts, not continuous focus on one spot. Strong crosswinds can shear a flame. Assault teams approach in zigzags and use leeward walls to shelter the jet. Rain makes the ground slippery, so gunners can slip when stepping back after a burst. A small but dangerous problem if there's a loophole with defenders right in front. Summed up in tidy, tactical economics, the material cost of a flamethrower tank is small compared with artillery, but the risk cost is concentrated on people. One well-placed short burst can save tens of minutes of fire and several casualties at a narrow entrance. One mistake, missing the smoke screen or the approach angle, can cost the assault team dearly. Therefore, units prioritize flamethrower use when the problem is clear: a confined target, a covered approach, demolition charges ready, and an unobstructed withdrawal route at the rear. In combat organization, every unit enforced mandatory safety rules. A flamethrower operator must not stand directly at a loophole for more than 2 seconds. After squeezing the trigger, step back immediately 3 to 5 meters. Do not fire continuously for more than 2 seconds per burst to avoid blowback or wasting fuel. Always approach the last 10 to 20 meters behind a smoke screen and have machine gun or mortar suppression, so defenders don't expose themselves to shoot the tank. Steel fuel cylinders withstand small arms fire at long range, but at 10 to 20 meters, a 7.92 by 57 or 30-06 round can still penetrate at a bad angle. On flame tanks, crews practice quick valve-shut procedures when they sense a hose breach to avoid leaks. Friendly armor and infantry guard the flanks to counter Panzerfausts or stake mines. Training 3-man teams and rotating roles prevents gunners from exhausting under 27 to 36 kilogram loads while carrying personal weapons and water. One point to stress is how the numbers drive decisions. A 20 to 35 meter range for man-portable models means the final approach accepts high risk, so every prior step reduces danger. Smoke thick enough to blind, suppressive fire to deter heads-up shots, and covered approach routes. A 10 to 15 second total firing time per tank means each trigger pull must be premeditated. There's no room for the habit of holding the trigger to be safe. With the Crocodile, an 80 to 100 meter reach allows standing outside rifle range, but still within Panzerfaust or anti-tank gun range if exposed too long. Thus, a advance, short burst, withdraw, change angle rhythm is safer. With the Zippo, the practiced cadence became 0.5 to 1 second burst, stop, Watch for black smoke. Fire again if needed, a lesson learned across hundreds of cave entrances. After 1945, flamethrowers retreated from the battlefield. Replacement technologies grew. Thermobaric explosives produced oxygen deprivation effects in confined spaces from a distance and were safer to deploy. Precision weapons put energy exactly where needed without close approach. Linear charges breached obstacles faster than Bangalore's. Ethical concerns and the proliferation of battlefield imagery also mattered. Flamethrower use in bunkers provoked strong reactions, prompting many Western armies to restrict or even remove man-portable flamethrowers. Still, looking back at 1939 to 1945, few immediate substitutes matched a flamethrower's effectiveness when the task was to seize and hold a confined position quickly and reduce casualties during the final assault into rear rooms. Soldiers' stories clarify both value and cost. In Europe in late 1944, a crocodile's two short bursts at 70 to 80 meters often produced a white flag at the bunker door, saving hours of shelling. At Stalingrad, assault teams described listening for a very short whoosh or whoomp inside a closed room as the signal to stop. A delay of a few seconds could be fatal. At Iwo Jima, an M2 gunner was watched closely by his teammates. The support gunner would block with suppressive fire the moment a muzzle appeared at a loophole. The fuel bearer swapped tanks during pauses. Defenders' memoirs often say that just hearing a flamethrower's sound, different from regular gunfire, made them think of abandoning the shelter because the air would become unbreathable in seconds. These minute details show flamethrowers forced immediate decisions on defenders, while users had to discipline every second. Within World War II, flamethrowers and flame tanks were not cutting-edge symbols, but tactical keys for the right problem. They did not replace artillery or bombs, but performed what those systems often missed, dealing with people in confined spaces, precisely where and when needed. They forced attackers and defenders to discipline every second and weigh risk by the meter. They also pose an uneasy ethical question that must be part of any discussion of battlefield effectiveness. Shortening combat can save assaulting lives, but the images left in a bunker are haunting. Holding both sides in the narration is the fairest way to speak of a weapon born from the need to clear blind corners, reaching its peak in 1944 to 1945, then receding as technology and society changed, yet lingering in field manuals: smoke first, suppression alongside, short bursts under 2 seconds, step back a few meters, let demolition finish the door. When you close, the lasting impression should not be range figures or fuel capacity, but how a few seconds of flame changed the course of a fight. On one hand, it was the right solution for the right problem. Force defenders from blind corners, open the way for infantry, shorten resistance time, and sometimes save lives at the spear tip. On the other, it reminds us of the price of fighting in tight spaces: searing heat, thick smoke, lack of oxygen, and memories combatants prefer to forget. A balanced understanding of both sides helps us read war soberly. Effectiveness doesn't erase human consequences, and the trauma left behind doesn't negate professional lessons learned on the ground. If you want one line to linger after the video, use this: short bursts, in the right place, at the right time. Withdraw immediately. Let your comrades finish the job. Not just a technical rule, but the essence of a combat philosophy born in the blind corners.